question is, what is an epideictic? Does anyone think that they know the answer or have a good answer on their paper that they would like to share? Julie, what do you got?
This one says the epideictic genre consists of ceremonial speeches, tributes, or toasts that use emotional language to appeal to the audience's attitudes.
Okay, slow down. Let's see what we got here. So ceremonial speech. Okay, keep going.
Tributes or toasts
Mm-hmm.
that use emotional language to appeal to the audience's attitudes.
Emotional language.
To explain why the gathering, person, or event is special or important.
I'm going to summarize that to say explain significance. Okay. Does anyone have anything they want to add as a component that they think is important, or do they have a qualm with any of these components? Shay.
No, but it's, are they short usually?
They can be.
Is that?
I don't think it's wrong. I just don't think it's right. So I would kind of ignore it. The Verderber and Selnow book, I think, emphasizes short.
Yeah.
I don't get why it does that. This is why I'm writing my own book next semester. Because look at an inaugural address or a State of the Union. I mean, those things are like 2 or 3 hours long sometimes. Anybody? So yeah, short is kind of a.
About conversational tone.
That is. Yeah, I mean that's fine. I don't think it's a crucial part because, for instance, if I stand up and I just read you an epideictic speech off a piece of paper, it's still an epideictic speech. It's just not well delivered. So again, I think it's one of those things where I could take it or leave it. Shay?
Resonates with the audience and builds a sense of community.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, I like builds a sense of community. I think that's hidden in this, and this is one of the things I was going to comment on. I think that's kind of hidden in this appeal to audiences' attitudes. That sort of gets at what I'm looking for, but first of all, it's not just an appeal, right? It's also a what? Well, yeah. So it's not just that I stand up and appeal to Alex's sense of loyalty to me, her teacher, right? Because that may not already be in Alex. I may have to create that thing that I want her to believe in and then appeal to it, right? So it's not just an appeal because the audience doesn't come to your epideictic speech already with the stuff that they need. So for instance, I mean, if you go to a 4th of July celebration, that's sort of like you go to Stone Mountain on 4th of July and you watch the fireworks and you watch the speeches from people talking about America, the land of the free, the home, and the brave, you're probably relatively certain that you're just reaffirming traditional values of your audience. In that case, it's probably just an appeal. But, you know, for Frederick Douglass, right, who was an abolitionist activist, and he wrote this really famous oratory in the 1840s called What to the Slave is the 4th of July, and what happened was is he was asked to speak at a 4th of July celebration, and he stood up there and he said, you know, I find this concept of independence really interesting when a third of America doesn't have it, and yet you're here celebrating the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? So that's a case in which the audience did not have the value that Frederick Douglass wanted them to have, which was equality, and so he used that as an occasion to create. So it's not just an appeal, it's also a creation of attitudes, and then this whole sense of building community, I think is really important. Because that's what epideictics do. Epideictic speeches are opportunities to stand up and talk about what makes us work as a social. Now, in my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people don't share this in the field, but I think all speeches are epideictic. I think every time a person gets up and gives a speech, the underlying question that they're trying to answer is, why are we here? What is the point of all of us getting together every day? Why don't we all just, I mean, how do you create a civilized society out of a bunch of people who are naturally sort of self-interested and arguing over scarce resources while you convince them that they're all one people? and that they belong together. And I think you do that every single time. I don't care if it's a TED Talk or the first day of class where your teacher's just talking to you about the syllabus. I think all of these, if they're done well, are opportunities to build community. So, anything else you want to add to this?
Could I like honor or praise like a group of
Good.
people?
Yep. So awesome, Kevin. That was the next thing, in fact, that was going to come out of my mouth. It can be a praise or blame. So one of the common things about epideictics is that they typically feel like speeches of praise. And obviously, you know, if someone were to pass away and you were asked to give a eulogy, you're probably not going to stand up there and be like, this guy, right? So you need to let the occasion dictate how you speak. But for our purposes, you can pretty much choose to praise or to blame. The speech we're going to watch today is a speech of praise, but the speech we're going to read for Thursday by Hunter S. Thompson is a speech of blame. You know, and for instance, when I gave my mom's eulogy in May, part of it was, because I'm a public speaking teacher and not just some whack off the street, part of it was certainly a speech of praise, but part of it was a speech of blame, because a lot of what killed my mother was, you know, her inability to stand up for herself and her willingness to be a doormat and put everyone else's needs before her own. And that, of course, is a very common motherly thing to do, but at the same time, when you do things like that, ultimately, you wind up not taking care of yourself, and then you get cancer, and then you get liver disease, and then you die, right? So my speech was not simply to talk about how awesome my mother was, but to use that as an occasion to talk to the audience about what do the living do now? You know, how do you deal with grief? Well, you learn to take it as a lesson in how to live life. And one of the ways to live life is to stand up for yourself, defend your boundaries, and not let people walk on you just because you think it's your job or because you're a nice person, right? So that's a case in which I sort of blended them to teach the same value, which is self-affirmation. But I also, that was a 7-minute eulogy, I think. And so for 3 minutes, you may want to focus on one or the other. Does anyone want to share any ideas they've had so far about their eulogy? Whether they'll do praise or blame, if they have their object in mind, what value it is they want to teach the audience? It's okay if you haven't, it's just a thought. No? Okay. Last semester I had a speech of blame for Snooki, teaching the audience about class, right? How to have class and tact and, you know. And then 2 years ago, I don't know, Maria Salazar, she's graduated now, but she gave the most amazing speech where she praised rappers for teaching her how to be a woman, but she picked some of the most vividly misogynistic and disgusting details from rap songs throughout history. So she took Fabulous's line, "Oops, there goes my kids all over your face," and all of these, just like terribly, but so descriptive. And she put together this speech, and she gave it, and obviously it was a speech of blame, right, in which she was criticizing rap for sort of being misogynistic and teaching women to act as sex objects for men, but it was a reverse, and she did like an ironic thing, and it's hard to pull off, but man, it was good. So those are just kind of 2 examples of people sort of playing with this arrangement. But then I've had, of course, wedding toasts, I've had eulogies, I've had speeches of appreciation, and then I've just had sort of stand-up comedy routines, which is fine, because a speech to entertain is a totally acceptable speech. So that leads us, I think, pretty well. Does anybody want to add? I think we pretty much covered all the basics here. Community building, praise or blame. Emotional language is a little vague for me. Certainly it's important, but I would say instead of emotional, highly stylized. You know, which of course means lots of rhetorical proofs, nice imagery, use of concrete descriptive details, and use of some stylistic devices that you may have learned about for your speeches up to now, like metaphor, like personification, like analogy, so highly stylized. And part of the reason this is a manuscript reading instead of an extemporaneous speech is so you can really focus on style, you know, in a way you can't when you're trying to sort of work off keyword note cards. So I would probably say highly stylized, not necessarily just emotional, because that word, I think, is dangerous for public speakers because it means a lot of different things. So anybody, anything else? Okay, so now let's go on to question number 2, which Which of the following is not a type of epideictic? And this hopefully was a giveaway, but it's B, forensic. That's a whole different type of speech. So there's epideictic, forensic, and deliberative. So the two types there were eulogy and keynote. Now, one of the things that I'm not crazy about with this reading, but also I like about these, you know, whether you did the Verderber and Selna or the Zarevsky, is its focus on the occasion, right? Because most of them is it's just a catalog of different kinds of speeches, right? So one of the things that happens because of those readings is that students treat the epideictic as if it's just a ceremonial speech and that's all it is. Hey, we're here today to talk about Dave on his birthday. Good job, Dave. Let's talk about some stuff about Dave. Okay, thank you so much for coming, right? They miss the opportunity to see the larger picture because they are so focused on the occasion. So the occasion is important, but it's not the purpose really of the speech. What the occasion is a topoi for invention. Anybody want to reach back in their brain and remind me what a topoi is? Yeah, so it's essentially a common topic or a stock issue that you can use as a starting point to build a speech, right? So one of the things that will help you as a student trying to get these speeches written is to think about a hypothetical occasion. But really, any speech praising or blaming anything for any value can be suited to any occasion. And you don't even have to have an occasion to give an epideictic. You know? Those people who stand up in the middle of the street and just start ranting about stuff, like, well, it's partially persuasive, but mostly it's an epideictic, you know, the hellfire with the signs. They don't need an occasion, they just stand there. They get going. So epideictics can happen all the time, and there's an epideictic aspect to almost every speech. So don't worry too much about the occasion. I can't spell. Occasion. Don't worry too much about the occasion. If it is an occasional speech, right, so how many of you think you're going to do sort of a situated occasional speech, like a toast or a eulogy or a speech of acceptance or a nomination or, okay, so in your case, you're going to want to make sure that in the warm-up we know what the occasion is, right? And of course, certain occasions come with certain responsibilities. If it's a wedding toast, you're supposed to reaffirm which values? Love, fidelity, commitment, and the institution of marriage. I mean, that's originally why wedding toasts were designed. It's not because we love the bride and the groom and we want to share our feelings. It's because back when marriages were still arranged, and I showed up at my marriage and me and Matt were getting hitched and I didn't like the look of him, people would stand up and remind me that marrying him and reproducing children and having a stable structure is the key to a successful society. They weren't feel-good speeches. They served a purpose, right? So that doesn't go away just because now people marry who they want. It just shifts. So one of the things, so of course the risk with the topoi, right, and we talked about this way back in when, is sometimes it's too common, but sometimes it's too crazy. So you're not going to stand up at a wedding and give a speech criticizing the institution of marriage. It doesn't make any sense. But at the same time, just standing up and talking about marriage, how great marriage is, and using your standard, you know, Song of Solomon quote or Shakespeare that everybody uses is going to be boring for the audience, especially as you get older and you start to sit through more and more of these stupid weddings. So you want to try to balance, right? You want a speech that definitely acknowledges the occasion and its expectations, but you want to put a twist on it, right? Maybe pick a different value to praise besides just love or commitment generally. Or maybe define it differently, right? For instance, maybe you want to write a speech about two people who are in love because they generate intellectual curiosity in one another, not just because they sit around on the couch, hold hands, wear the sweatpants, and watch TV, right? So remember that that's the risk with the topoi because it is a commonplace. It's a common expectation. So everyone here knows that when they go to a eulogy, there are certain things that they're going to hear, but try not to make that all that they hear. You know, try to add a little bit of something different to it, a little bit of flavor, as it were, right? And we talked about this, right? You take the stock issue and you twist it a little bit to suit your needs. So the occasion, treat it as a topoi, and certainly if you prefer to write a speech without an occasion, that is fine. You can just stand up here and get going. You don't have to have an occasion. But if you would like to have an occasion, make sure it's clearly established. And then last but not least, Why is the following epideictic central idea statement inadequate? Today we are gathered to pay tribute to the most special woman in my life, my cat. I did that for you, Matt. So what doesn't work about it? Or what does work about it as a central idea for an epideictic?
Well,
Carolyn?
like, it sort of is the kind of thing that you say I feel, but she says it's this most special in my life, which would...
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so it could be that the, I'm not sure if I agree with you, though. You've never heard anybody stand up at a birthday toast or a retirement party or whatever and say, okay, everybody gather around. We're going to pay tribute to... yeah, maybe. I don't think that that's an uncommon phrase to use in a speech of epideictic, whether it's ceremonial or, you know, if Matt wins an award next month and, you know, we decide to have a party for him, somebody gives toasts. But, yeah, that's okay, and that's a good thing to know when you're using cue phrases that don't make sense, so Carolyn might rewrite that to sound maybe a little more upbeat. Okay? So one maybe is the form. The sentence structure is off. That wasn't one I thought of, and I may, but yes, it's a good thought. Anybody want to piggyback on Carolyn? What works about it?
It at least tells you who.
Good. It's got an object. Yeah. What else does it have?
It's clearly a praise speech.
Good. So it establishes praise. Who said something? Establishes the occasion. Nice. All right. Is that everything we need?
No. Don't you have to say why?
Yep. We're missing
Reason. Point. Central.
the value or the idea, depending on, right? Because remember, all central ideas are combinations of objects and the idea or value behind them. And one of the biggest issues that every single student runs into in an epideictic speech is trying to teach like 7 values. So, you know, you write a speech of praise about your cat and you talk about 19 values. Just pick one and choose supporting evidence that illustrates that one value. So in this case, yes, we're missing the value. And it clearly establishes praise or blame. So ideally, this would say something like, so to take Carolyn's comment into consideration, it's about time we all stood up and recognized, is that better?
Yeah.
The most special woman in my life, my cat, because she value that you want the audience to celebrate, or attitude or belief or whatever it is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a value in the strong sense. The other thing that is weak about this is that it's a little too... Be careful of speeches that are mostly about you. So try to switch my into... Good, yes. Right, because if the whole point is to build community, right, we talked about that, to build a sense of community, to teach a communal value, you want to try and share the object as much as possible with the audience. And one of the ways, so suppose you do want to praise your cat and nobody knows your cat or whatever. One of the ways you can kind of do that is to say, now you may not know my cat, but I can assure you she teaches what all of us would like to see more of, and that is compassion, or whatever you want to say. And obviously my cat doesn't really have a personality, so this is sort of a stretch. But you want to try as much as possible to shift the object of affection to the audience, but at the very least, everyone needs to share the value. So by the end of the speech, everyone in this room should be able to say, you know, the object sounds great, but what I really picked up on was X. So you may never really care specifically about the object, but you do know that this is the particular value or ideal or attitude that you want to hold up. And there was a question maybe from Rory.
Oh, no, you answered that.
Okay. So yeah, because remember, it is about building community. So you want to try to share the value and the object as much as possible. And obviously, these things will be easier. You know, a speech about my mother to this group, you know, that object is very far away from you, so I have to use a lot of concrete detail to push the object in your direction, and then to build as much as possible the value around it. so that we all can see why this woman would be significant to how all of us live our lives. Not just, because it's not the speech of self-introduction. With the speech of self-introduction, you could get away with that. You stood up, you talked about yourself, and you mostly stayed outside the audience, right? We didn't do very much audience connection in that speech. But this one, you really need to push it out. And if you really want to redo your speech of self-introduction as an epideictic, you can definitely do an epideictic for yourself, if you want. So that's one, I've never seen a student do it, but that is one way to really see growth over the semester, to go back and take that original 2-3 minute speech of self-introduction you did and repurpose it as an epideictic to see how much further you've come with your style, your invention, your ability to connect with an audience, your ability to organize a speech. But they're really similar speeches. The problem is you don't want to do a me speech, because the audience won't feel that sense of community or general purpose that's so important. Okay, so that's the general sort of breakdown of how that works. So give credit where credit is due. They're each worth, a third or whatever. So just put a big X next to the ones that you think are totally wrong. Write partial next to the ones that are right. Check mark the rest, and I will do the math and pass those forward. And I'm now going to turn off my computer, which was